Welcome to a new episode of the brand called You. Today we bring you a really accomplished human resources professional who's had extensive experience in the field of human resources, Sanjay Sinha. Sanjay, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Nice to be with you again.
Thank you. Sanjay is currently the Group Chief Human Resources Officer of the Fortis Healthcare Group. He has worked for NTPC, Siemens, HFCL, Polaris, Nortel, and Hinduja. And he's a certified executive coach. Sanjay, talk to us a little bit about the highlights of your early professional career.
So, after passing out, I started looking at where I can really contribute and which companies can contribute to my learning as well. And while doing so, in my days, I think there were 3 or 4 things that were very popular. One was called AAO for insurance agencies, assistant administrative officers, POs, probationary officers in banks.
Yeah.
But somehow I didn't want to go there because of reason and I thinking in terms of what is new to this world. So during that course, this advertisement came in for NTPC and I applied. They took around 3 levels of interview, written tests, interviews, group discussions, so on and so forth. And before I realized, one day I got an appointment offer. So getting selected from a population of roughly 40 to 50,000 people in a batch of 45, some of the brightest brains in India, it was really a privilege. So I was with them. I was a management trainee for 2 years, then did some assignments in various projects. I was very lucky during this phase that I got personally mentored by some of the top professionals in HR. And I owe a lot of my whatever little success I have achieved to my mentors in my early stages, mid-career, and even at senior level. And then I worked with NTPC for around 9 years, moved on to Siemens to seek more challenges because the economy was changing and there was a need for HR professionals who come with OD background to look at and start working with the population differently. Worked with them, Lucent Technologies, got into telecom, and then took on national role, international role. Finally, I landed up with a role with Nortel Networks, which was an Asia Pacific role, almost like a dream role and dream company to work for. Very robust in processes, taught me a lot of things. And then they moved to Singapore for a couple of years. I worked there, came back, and I have always tried to do something different in my career after a while. So Hinduja has offered me a role that was very different from what I was getting from other places in India. This was a merger and acquisition role, and they were looking at growing to $1 billion company, and obviously organic expansion was a big part of their plan. So they wanted to leverage my international experience, so I joined Hinduja Global Solutions in 2010, worked with them for 5 years, and promoter moved to me a different company to turn it around. And then I took a break for some time and then back to corporate life as Group CHRO for Fortis Healthcare.
So, you had mentioned that Nortel Networks was the most challenging assignment that you had. What were some of these challenges?
So it was both a brilliant learning experience and it was also a challenging assignment because till that time I had worked more or less in India and looked at Indian companies either in software or in telecom, both on operator side and vendor side. And here was an Asia Pacific role, looking after roughly 16 countries in Asia Pacific. The way I love to put it, from Pakistan to New Zealand, minus Korea. So one, it was a big span. The challenges were in terms of time zone management. So by the time you get out of bed, Australia is almost half day.
Correct.
And then you reach office, finish the work, and before you know, US starts, and then you have late calls, right?
Yeah.
So managing time zone was challenging, but also very hugely learning. And then dealing with different nationalities, geographies, cultures, the way of looking at things.
Yeah.
Though I would not say it's a challenge, it was a huge learning experience. And Nortel had some of the best robust processes, brilliant people to work who challenge you every day in terms of your intellectual capability and thinking beyond what is obvious. I think that was the biggest thing that I learned at Nortel.
Yeah. And as a global HR manager, I mean, you've seen the human resources function evolve.
Yeah.
I remember when I started working, 40 years ago, we used to have an industrial relations manager, we used to have a personnel manager, you just spoke of OD, and now all of these have got merged into the role of the CHRO. How has the role evolved? Because I see that now HR people are much more involved in the way the business is functioning and in the corporate strategy.
Yes, you're right. I think the way HR especially has evolved in India is a journey in itself, and I'm lucky that I have been a part of all phases. I remember my initial first official title was personnel officer.
Correct.
Then became senior personnel officer, and before I realized, the era of HRD started.
Yeah.
And then the era of HRE, human resource evolution, started.
Correct.
I think a lot of has to do with the way economy has grown and the way economy has shaped itself. Thanks to liberalization and globalization, a lot of MNCs came in, they brought in their processes.
Yeah.
So learning was huge for the whole industry, I would say, and the entire HR fraternity almost grabbed it with both hands. And so rather than looking at only employment, statutory compliance, IR, industrialization, I think we started looking at the human resource population as people rather than objects to be dealt with. And the focus was, how do you work with these guys to develop them and take them to a different level? So that's a challenge I also always work with. And the new models, techniques, and theories of organizational behavior that have come in or were always there, but they were somewhere hidden in the back. They came in forefront. A lot of interventions were launched, and we saw success of those interventions. The companies galloped forward, and CEOs also started realizing that it's not only the EBITDA, PBT, PAT that you need to be worried about. You also need to worry about people, because I always believe in technology you will go to an extent and then it taper off. Then again an invention or innovation, and then it will go up again. But to create manpower as your competitive edge, that is a challenge that every CEO started looking at very seriously, and that's why a lot of investments were made in HR. So yes, it has come to a stage where I think CHRO or head of human resources is almost an equal business partner as compared to his peers in the industry.
Absolutely.
And I tell my team whenever they go as business partners that you no longer need to be a note taker in the meeting. You need to actively take part in the business decisions, give your suggestions, challenge business guys if possible. But before that, pick up those skills and do that.
Yeah.
So that's how I have seen
Wonderful.
this evolution go.
So, I've also seen this buzz phrase, people are our biggest asset, evolve. I used to hear it in ITC when Ajit Aksar, the first Indian chairman, would speak about it 38 years ago. And today, what you're saying is absolutely true, that people have become a very, very critical part of an organization's growth. But tell me, if you look at the alphabet ladder, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, millennials, how has the HR function evolved in managing different aspirations? I mean, today, virtually everyone you must be hiring must be a millennial.
Correct.
And their expectations are very different.
I think from baby boomers to Gen X, Gen Y, now Gen Z or millennials as we call it, each generation I personally believe is more progressive and kind of more intelligent than previous generation was. Not because of simply simply because I would say the kind of exposure they get, the social standards that the family have achieved, the education, And the overall awareness of so many things that these guys have today, these generations have evolved far faster and far quicker. To deal with millennials is one challenge that is very, very seriously on my mind, because like it or don't like it, the people who are in the managing CXO's position today, they come either from baby boomers time or Gen X kind of a time frame. And dealing with millennials is a challenge because they come with so much exposure, so very different attitude to life. But I guess they are talented as well.
Yeah.
So if you look at them as people who can contribute to your business, I think they can be very, very productive, and they come with some very, very out of box thinking. They will not change, and we also don't want them to change. Why would take them 50 years back?
Correct.
The way I'm looking at this issue is, how do I train my managers, my CXOs, my peers, my team members to deal with these people? In terms of how do we get into their shoes, the way of thinking, and how do we reach a common point where we say both leverage their best.
That is true. And the millennials are the future of not only this nation but the world.
Yeah.
And from a human resource perspective, to understand their aspirations and then manage them is probably going to be a big challenge for everybody.
Yes, it's a challenge, and that's why one of my biggest concerns is, how do I prepare my senior team to deal and leverage their best, not get trapped in one of the two different style of behavior that these guys have.
Interesting. So Sanjay, you have done a lot of work in OD.
Yeah.
For all our viewers, help us understand what is the difference between OD and HR.
So, to put it very simplistically, I would say OD is a subset of HR.
Okay.
While HR primarily would deal with functions like employment, recruitment, statutory compliances, managing the entire life cycle of a person, dealing with day-to-day things. OD looks at how can we leverage some of the best theories and models and the new research that is coming up to make sure that the population is far more productive, far more meaningful contribution comes from them. And how do I make an overall impact, positive impact on the organization? So we have done a lot of things, working with teams, working with individual, working with group, leaderships. They would possibly fall in when you want to ramp up organization from a level X to X1, X2, X3 and X7.
Interesting. So you've done a lot of work in large companies, and I'm sure you've seen startups and people who are starting off in life. What do you think are some of the mistakes people make with regard to human resources when you are setting up new companies? The entrepreneur sometimes believes he or she knows it all, yet they have to depend on people. Turnover of startups is very high. What are your thoughts?
So I have worked with a lot of startups, either as friend, as a guide, mentor, consultant, and I've realized that most of them, when they start, the pressures are on revenue. That is a good focus to have, but that is also a huge trap in itself. So if you are innovating a product reaches a life cycle, you want to go into production, you want to launch it, obviously the investors behind you are looking for some return, and there's a revenue pressure. So what do? Either you grow the revenue, sales, adoption, hits, whatever you call it, or you look at the other side, which is like, I cut the cost. And unfortunately, one of the areas that they think they can cut costs is, okay, we'll deal with senior HR guys or HR team little later on, just get 1 or 2% to recruit, manage these people, fill up the forms, make sure that the personal files are ready, and so on and so forth. And what goes for a toss is processes, practices, and a culture and a behavior. What behaviors we want to promote, what values we want to promote. Somehow, my feeling is they get lost here and there. And when you reach a stability phase, when you are big enough, then you realize it's possibly too late to change those things, because you have always lived like this for the last 10 years. Say.
Yeah.
And then it requires huge amount of investment. The change management process itself is painful, especially for guys who have been there from inception. So I think if they do a judicious balance between the focus on revenue and focus on the people and processes, I think it should work well for them.
Interesting. So one more question on HR before we move on. You spoke about the culture of Nortel. I worked for 3 large companies, and I always speak about culture. How important is culture in the life of an organization, and what goes into developing a culture?
I think culture per se is a fairly nebulous word, because different people treat this word very differently.
Absolutely.
But to me, culture is what do you stand for? What behaviors I want to promote in this company? What values we should live, irrespective of whatever pressures we have? What are the 3-4 things that drive us in my decision making? I remember one of the CEOs who was under a lot of pressure, and sales teams or business teams, I would say, would cutting corners here and there. He said, Sanjay, a role of a HR guy or a leader is also to be a conscious keeper of the company. And when people are going little astray because there is huge pressure from the board, from investors, people will take shortcuts. And that's where we need to stand up and say, this is not the behavior this company promotes. So to answer your question, culture to me is, if I ask somebody outside who has heard about my company, say, what is this company? He should say 4 or 5 things. To me, this company stands for this company stands for this, values, people, talent, innovation, honesty, integrity, customer care, whatever. It could be 3 or 4 things. I don't believe in more than 3 or 4 things in any case. You have some groups in India where you can attach an adjective to them even today. So culture is what I drive, how my people live through that. And no matter what pressures are, I stand by those. Strong integrity in that term. And to me, integrity is one of the most fascinating definitions I heard about integrity was doing the right thing when nobody is watching.
I agree. Absolutely right. So now moving on, you and I got certified as coaches together. In the last few years, I find there is a lot of need arising for coaching in India. Earlier, as a professional, coaching was done by a senior professional. In the family business, it was done by an older family member.
Correct.
What is changing that now professionally certified coaches are being sought?
So, my personal take on this is coaching is one of the development tools, and its counterpart in a way is like mentoring. So earlier it was more mentoring in terms of father telling son or grandfather telling the grandson or the father, in terms of this is how business is done and this is what you need to do. And then came the age of good reputed CXOs coming from background, they grooming their successors. Coaching is very different, because here you deal with specific issues, you deal it, make sure that the change is crystallized, and you move on. And it typically deals with 4 things, I think. One is competencies, addressing competencies if there are gaps, looking at behaviors, beliefs, and perspective, if you want that perspective to change. And obviously, the way you want to do it, it could be for current role, future roles. Today, a lot of discussion goes around succession planning.
Yeah.
So it could be for future role, it could be for my current role if there are gaps in my competencies or perspective or a mindset change. Or it could be in terms of a transition that I'm transitioning from a role X to role Y and there is some gap that need to be covered, you get a coach. And when you do coach, you either look at what are the possible ways to solve a problem, or there are unexplored or unexploited opportunity this person has, and I together we will take a deep dive. And a third party is preferable because then there are no stakes involved, right? And after a level of trust is built, I can really pour out my, okay, this is I'm comfortable with, this is I'm not comfortable with, this is what is happening on my personal front, this is what is happening on my professional front. How do I cope up with these challenges? Because there's a no stake environment, and you are also a certified coach that we stick by ethics and confidentiality and those values very, very strictly. And whatever is told to us, what is told in a room remains in the room. It doesn't go out, except in a way when the sponsor is there and they need to be guided on something. So I think coaching has come because one, I think there are no stakes involved. The other person possibly has seen it, done it, lived through it n number of times. So I have experience, I have a opportunity to leverage those experience, immediately learn from it rather than making mistakes and doing it. And also comes a lot of time think that yes, I think this guy is brilliant, but there's a small fatal flaw which could derail his entire career. Why not tell him, give him an external coach who can work with him, make him look at a different perspective or challenge his belief system without taking his productivity down. Because I sometimes realize if you try to do it internally, the person say, why me? Right? So when it comes to why me, so obviously he starts doubting, what is my future in the company?
Correct.
Why is HR guy talking to me? Talking as an HR guy itself is a little scary thing. So productivity possibly goes down, but when you have a third party, you really don't care, you pour your house, pick up things. You can experiment with that person. One of the roles that executive coach, executive has, let somebody bounce their ideas with me. Let them shoot it out before they take it to the team.
Right.
We do an analysis in terms of, okay, these are the pros, these are the negative things. We balance like this and then goes to the team rather than taking it to the team and falling it flat.
Correct.
So I think there are a huge amount of, the number of benefits I can keep on rattling for next half an hour, but that's not the idea. But I think coaching has come a long way and it's accepted as one of the very powerful tools of development now.
And from a coachee perspective, how does the coachee evaluate whether he or she is getting the right inputs from the coach?
If I were to put myself in coach's shoes, the way I would look at it, has this guy been able to show me things that I have not looked at? Has he been able to bring a new perspective? Has he brought a new dimension to this knowledge framework or the framework of business? So if that is happening, and it makes sense, it has to make sense at the end of the day. It has to make business sense, it has to make sense from HR point of view, finance point of view, every point of view. That's what I would expect as in coachee from my coach.
Interesting. So now moving on to the next segment of our discussion, which is more about you. You've had such an amazing journey and been successful. What would be the secret of your success?
Amazingly successful, I don't know, but yes, I do have a lot of experiences, and I personally believe a good experience and a bad experience both are important because they tell you what to do and what not to do.
Correct.
So I value a bad experience also equally as good as I do with a good experience. But the way I have been groomed and I have the things that I have really made a part of my life, one thing is think ahead. And this is more true in today's world because things are changing so fast. The technology that was there last year, all those guys are becoming almost redundant by the 2020. So think ahead, plan, look at the bigger picture. A lot of people get stuck in one point and then they lost out on the bigger picture. I have always looked at the big picture and how this company should look 3 years hence, 5 years hence. Earlier it was 5 years, now people are talking of 3 years, also a long time. And making sure that I also pick up competencies, new competencies, almost every alternate years. So the way I have done is, whether it's company sponsored or I put it from my pocket, almost every alternate year I pick up a training program.
Okay.
I go through different courses, I meet people. Because the new generation, like you said, is coming far more aware. They come from good business schools, they're good engineering colleges, the exposure itself is so high. So you can't afford to rest on your laurels, which
Sure.
you have earned 10, 20 years back. So I make sure that I read a lot, I attend trainings, I attend conferences. Like there was a conference on Tech HR a few days back. I spent almost 4-5 hours only looking at the stalls, what kind of wares and what kind of products they are displaying, and it was just mind-boggling. And then you realize possibly, yeah, this is how I can do it in my company. This is how I can improve the productivity, morale, engagement, whatever it is. So this is what I
Excellent.
will do.
And in today's world, everyone's working long hours, everyone is under stress. How do you manage your work-life balance?
Sometimes it becomes difficult, but I make sure that at least 90% of weekends are available to the family and they are undistracted. Most of the time I do manage that, only a few times that we use weekends. So as a principal, I leave my weekends untouched. It is for family, with the family. And then whatever little socializing we need to do, because the families are here, either somebody drops in or you go somewhere, still a fairly socially integrated society.
Yeah.
I do that, and that's what takes my pressure off and it prepares me for next Monday.
Wonderful. So, question I ask all my guests: tell me about your biggest learning from your biggest failure.
That's it.
Or learnings from any failures.
No, I would. When I moved to Singapore, I moved from a fairly established role,
Yeah.
identified as a top quartile HR person, ready to be prepared for CHRO at a global level, and then I took up this role in Singapore. And I was interested with 3 businesses. So I had a business leader sitting in Singapore, I have business leaders sitting in Sydney, I have a business leader sitting in India. And then I realized that the expectations from each is that I am a dedicated resource as a director HR for them. And that used to give me like nightmare, because I can be in one meeting at a given point in time, while the other person has the expectation that I would be on his call.
Yeah.
And I realized soon enough that this is not going to work. And I possibly chucked a fairly established position, reputation behind my performance, and got into this. So I had a serious conversation with the Asia Pacific leader, and then we decided, okay, let's start bring it down to 2, which was
Also
still manageable.
yeah.
Still manageable. So keeping that nightmare apart, learning I got from it was that you need to balance your responsibilities and make sure that the business that you support has your 100% attention. Because a lot of leaders want that attention, but more than that, I think being an HR person, you need to give attention to the teams that are working with you.
Correct.
So that's one of my biggest, if you can say, failure or experience, and that's my biggest learning in terms of balancing the roles and responsibility, and making sure that either you have a team who takes care of others, or you have a basket which is like self-contained in itself.
Sanjay, one last question to you. And you spoke about culture, you spoke about integrity. What would your advice be to the thousands of young people who are listening to you and me talking? If they want to start off as an entrepreneur, or when they start their careers as young managers, what would your advice be?
So I would say that be focused, but also keep looking at the larger picture.
Okay.
And that's because the larger picture is end of the day more important than the small focus area where you can really get lost. That's my thing. And then keep updating yourself, keep looking at new things, new developments, and make HR your competitive advantage. Because nobody, what you do, whether you are in products, you are in services, you are in retail, or wherever you are, people are the biggest assets. And we call them biggest assets, but we really need to show that kind of a intent behind that sentence.
Sanjay, thank you very much for being
Thanks
on
a
our
lot,
show.
Ashutosh.
I think you've been very honest, you've been very upright, and you've given us a lot of points to think about. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Pleasure was mine.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You podcast. Be sure to visit tbcy.in to join the conversation, access show notes, and discover fantastic bonus content. You can follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Simply search for The Brand Called You. Thank you, and see you next week.